My family didn't think I was a failure. That would have required them to take me seriously enough to form an opinion. What they thought was worse, they thought I was a hobby, a phase, a quiet little quirk that hadn't worked itself out yet. So when my mother called me 3 days after mocking my career in front of my sister's new boyfriend and asked me to co-sign a $500,000 loan for a property I happened to know better than anyone in the county, I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I made one phone call. Not to the bank. Not to a real estate agent. To the woman who owned the property. A week later, I was the one who owned it. And I invited my whole family to come see it. I want to tell you about the kind of tired that lives in your bones when you've spent your whole life being the wrong kind of smart in the wrong kind of family. My family wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. My mother didn't yell. My father didn't disappear. My sister didn't bully me in the hallways at school. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. It was the kind of dismissal that comes with a smile. The kind that, if you tried to describe it to someone, would make you sound dramatic, oversensitive, difficult. You know the type. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in textile conservation and material culture from a university that routinely turns away more applicants than it accepts. I spent 4 years after graduation working under some of the most respected conservators in the country, learning how to stabilize 19th century silk, how to reverse water damage on pre-Civil War quilts, how to coax color back into faded Amish linens without compromising the original fiber. I run my own practice now, a small firm, just me and 2 assistants, contracted by museums, private collectors, historical societies, and occasionally, estate attorneys trying to figure out what a deceased client's storage unit is actually worth. I am not figuring things out. I have figured things out. The problem is that textile conservation is not the kind of career that announces itself at dinner parties. My sister Phoebe has a career that announces itself everywhere. She's a real estate developer. Or, more accurately, she wants to be a real estate developer. Right now, she flips houses with her mother's money and photographs them for an Instagram account with 60,000 followers. She posts about open floor plans and subway tile and the magic of taking something old and making it livable. Every caption ends with a little sunflower emoji. Her comment section loves her. My mother, Lynn, is a mortgage broker. Has been for 25 years. Her whole world is square footage and interest rates, and the particular satisfaction of matching ambitious people with expensive properties. She's good at it. She has opinions about neighborhoods the way other people have opinions about college football. Loudly, constantly, and with the implication that anyone who disagrees simply doesn't understand the stakes. My father, Doug, is a retired high school principal who has become, in his 60s, a man who has almost no opinions of his own. He nods along. He refills his coffee. He says things like, "Your mother makes a good point, and well, that's something to think about." He loves me, I think. He just never made it a habit to say so when it was inconvenient. And then there's me. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized city about 90 minutes from my parents' house. The apartment has good light and bad parking. My living room has a dehumidifier running almost constantly because I store work pieces there when I'm between studio spaces. There are archival boxes stacked along one wall. A 19th century mourning quilt is currently resting on a padded form behind my couch, waiting for me to finish stabilizing a section of the backing. My mother has been inside my apartment twice in 3 years, and both times she described it as interesting, in a tone that meant something else entirely. I had driven the 90 minutes to my parents' house on a Sunday in late March because my sister's boyfriend, a man named Garrett, was meeting the family for the first time, and my mother had made it clear that attendance was not optional. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a sinus headache I had been fighting for 4 days. I was not at my best. I was, also, I realize now, more vulnerable than I'd let myself admit. Dinner started fine. My mother made her pot roast, which she always makes when she wants to impress someone. Garrett was exactly what you'd expect someone named Garrett to be. Handsome in a forgettable way, good at making conversation, clearly nervous in the way of someone who genuinely wants to be liked. He asked about the house. He complimented the backyard. He laughed at my father's jokes. He was doing everything right. Then he looked across the table at me. "So what do you do?" he asked. Just that, friendly, open, genuinely curious. I started to answer. I'm a textile conservator. I work with historic fabrics and fiber art, mostly for museums and private coal. My mother laughed. Not a full laugh. A short, clipped sound. Like something had slipped out before she could stop it. She waved her hand and looked at Garrett with this expression, fond exasperation, is the only way I can describe it, and said, "Don't worry about it, honey. It's a whole thing." She picked up her fork. "Let's not go down that road." Phoebe smiled the way she always smiles when she's embarrassed for me. "It's like art restoration," she said helpfully. "But for blankets." She tilted her head at Garrett. "Very niche." Garrett looked at me. I looked back. I could see the discomfort in his face. The specific discomfort of watching something happen that you don't have the full context for. No one at that table laughed out loud. No one said anything cruel with their words, technically, but my mother had just told Garrett, in front of everyone, that my career wasn't worth explaining. That it was a whole thing. A road not worth going down. My father was studying his pot roast. I took a sip of wine and said nothing. I have a lot of practice saying nothing. I've had 31 years to perfect it. After dinner, Phoebe cornered me in the kitchen while I was loading dishes. "Hey," she said. "Don't be weird about earlier. Mom was just trying to keep things light. Garrett's kind of a lot to handle when he gets going about something. She was just redirecting." "Sure," I said. "You're not upset." "I'm fine." She gave me a look that meant she knew I wasn't, and also that she wasn't going to push it, because pushing it would make things harder for her. That's always been the calculation with Phoebe. She's not mean. She's just loyal to whoever's in charge of the room. I drove home in the dark with the heat on too high, and I thought about all the things I hadn't said. I thought about the Whitmore collection I'd just finished. 42 pieces of 19th century Appalachian weaving, commissioned by a heritage foundation in Virginia, for which I'd been paid more in one check than my mother had probably made in her last 6 months. I thought about the symposium I'd been invited to speak at in Edinburgh in September. I thought about the email I'd ignored from a journalist at Smithsonian Magazine who wanted to profile my work. I thought about how none of that would have mattered at that table. It still wouldn't have translated into anything they could point to and recognize as success. And then my phone rang. It was my mother, still in the car. I almost didn't pick up. "Holly, I need to ask you something," she said. She'd skipped hello. She always skips hello when she wants something. "I need you to co-sign a bridge loan." I pulled into a gas station and put the car in park. "For what?" "The Alderton property." A beat. "You know the one?" I did know the one. The Alderton estate was a 14-room federal-style house on 12 acres, about 40 minutes outside my parents' town. It had been built in the 1840s by a family that had owned half the county at one point, and it had stayed in continuous ownership by the same family ever since, which was rare and historically significant, and the reason it had been placed on the State Register of Historic Places 15 years ago. The current owner was an 83-year-old woman named Mrs. Alderton, a widow, the last of the line, who had been quietly, privately trying to figure out what to do with a house she couldn't maintain and couldn't bring herself to sell to the wrong person. I knew about the Alderton estate because I had been corresponding with Mrs. Alderton for 2 years. I had been introduced to her through a colleague at the State Historical Society who knew I had an interest in the property, specifically in the estate's original contents. The house still held the family's textile collection, hand-loomed wool coverlets from the 1850s, a nearly intact set of parlor drapes in silk damask, a child's sampler stitched in 1863 that was the finest piece of schoolgirl embroidery I'd ever seen in person. Mrs. Violet Famist Alderton had been letting me document the collection for a research project. We had, over the course of 2 years and many cups of tea in her drafty front parlor, become something close to friends. She had told me, over those cups of tea, exactly what she wanted for the house. Not money, or not primarily money. She wanted the house to stay whole. She wanted someone who understood what it was. She was terrified of developers. She had used the word terrified of developers. She had used the word terrified specifically. And she was not a woman who used strong words carelessly. I sat in the gas station parking lot and listened to my mother explain that she and Phoebe had put in an offer on the Alderton estate and were $180,000 short of what the bank would approve without a co-signer with additional liquid assets. "Just a formality," my mother said. "We'll have the loan paid off within 18 months, she said. "It's a smart investment," she said. "The bones are there." Once we update the kitchen and open up the main floor, the resale value will be. What are you planning to do with it? I asked. Flip it. Obviously. She laughed a little. Phoebe's been scoping it for 6 months. The land alone is worth twice the asking price if we subdivide the back acreage. And with the right renovation, the house is on the historic register, I said. Which limits some exterior changes but not interior. And we've talked to someone about getting it delisted. It's possible. I felt something go very quiet inside me. I can't co-sign, I said. There was a pause. Holly. I'm not going to co-sign a loan for a project I think is a mistake. A mistake. A mistake. Her voice shifted into the register I'd known my whole life. Patient, slightly injured, the register of someone who has been very reasonable and is not being met with reason. This is a significant opportunity. Your father and I have put a lot of work into identifying this property. Phoebe has a buyer lined up already contingent on the renovation. I know the property, Mom. Then you know what it's worth. I know what it's worth to preserve it, I said. That's not the same thing. She sighed, long and deliberate. I knew you'd make this difficult. I knew it. Another pause. You've always had this thing about old things, Holly, and I've supported that. I really have. But sometimes old things are just old. And sometimes they need to be updated to be useful. You can't live in a museum. I thought about Mrs. Alderton's parlor. The afternoon light through the original wavy glass windows, the sampler on the wall that a 12-year-old girl had stitched the same year the first battle of the Civil War was fought. I'm not going to co-sign, I said again. She hung up. I sat in the parking lot for a while. Then I drove home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea that went cold before I drank half of it, and I did something I'd been thinking about for 14 months. I called Mrs. Alderton's number. Not the landline she'd given me her personal cell for the research project. It was 10 o'clock at night, which I knew was risky, but I also knew she was a bad sleeper, and usually up until 11 watching British mystery programs. She picked up on the third ring. Well, she said, without preamble. I was wondering when you'd call. I told her I had a serious question to ask, and that I wanted her to tell me honestly if it was out of line. She said she had never in her life told anyone less than honestly when they were out of line. So I should go ahead. I asked if she'd be willing to have a conversation about a private sale. There was a pause on her end. Not a long one. Tell me what you have in mind. I talked for 20 minutes. I told her what I could offer, which was, to be clear, not what a developer could offer, and not what a house flipper could offer. But it was cash, or close to it. I had spent 9 years building a practice with very low overhead and very high-value contracts. I had not bought a new car since 2018. I did not take vacations that cost more than the gas it took to drive somewhere interesting. What I had done was put money into 2 investment accounts that I had not touched. A retirement account that was absurdly healthy for someone my age, and a small sideline in buying undervalued storage units at auction and reselling the textiles, which had made me, over a decade, quietly and unglamorously solvent. I was not rich in any way that looked like rich from the outside. My car was 11 years old. My apartment had secondhand furniture. I didn't own a single piece of jewelry that hadn't come from an estate sale. But I had enough. Mrs. Alderton listened to all of it. Then she said, "My attorney is going to want to see financials. Can you have something to him by Wednesday?" "I can have something to him tomorrow," I said. She laughed. It was a good laugh, dry and warm. "Your mother came to see the house in January, you know," she said. "Brought a contractor with her. Before I'd even agreed to a showing, the contractor started talking about taking out the back wall of the kitchen before he'd gotten through the front door." A pause. "I didn't invite her back." "I know," I said. "Wednesday then," she said. "And Holly, I'm glad you called. I didn't sleep much that night. I spent most of it at my kitchen table, going through bank statements and account summaries, putting together a packet for Mrs. Alderton's attorney that was clean and clear and organized in the way that I had learned, over years of working with institutions that deal in very old and very valuable things, that serious people expect documents to be organized. At 7 in the morning, I emailed the packet. At 9:15, Mrs. Patchen, Alderton's attorney, called me. At 11, he sent over a preliminary purchase agreement. My mother's offer, contingent on financing, contingent on the co-signer she wasn't going to get, contingent on approval from a bank that had already flagged the loan as overleveraged, had been quietly set aside. The sale closed in 3 weeks. Fastest closing of my life. Cash transactions have a beautiful simplicity to them. There's nothing to wait for. I held the keys for about 10 minutes before I started making a list. The list had nothing to do with resale value or open floor plans or the back acreage. It had to do with the wool coverlets in the upstairs bedroom and whether the silk damask in the parlor could be stabilized in place or needed to be removed for treatment, and what kind of climate control system could be installed without compromising the original plaster, and whether the 12-year-old girl's sampler should stay where it had always hung or be moved to a more controlled environment. I thought about that a lot, actually. Whether the sampler should stay or be moved. I still haven't decided. Some things take time. My family had been quiet since my phone call with my mother. Phoebe sent me a single text the day after that said, "Mom's really hurt, you know." And I had replied, "I know." And that had been the end of it. My father called once, left a voicemail that was mostly him clearing his throat and saying he hoped I was doing well and that things would work out. I appreciated the effort, which is the most I could say. I could have told them what I'd done. I kept not telling them. I'm not sure exactly why. Partly because I knew what my mother's reaction would be and I wasn't ready to spend my emotional energy on it. Partly because I wanted to understand the house better before I tried to explain it to people who would never understand it the way I did. And partly, I'll be honest, because I was still angry. I was still carrying that dinner table around in my chest, that short, clipped laugh, the whole thing it implied. I told them I was coming to visit. A Sunday brunch, I said in a group text. I have some news to share. I gave them the address that morning. I watched their texts come in from the driveway of the Alderton estate, leaning against my 11-year-old car in the pale spring light. My mother, this is the Alderton property. What are you doing? This isn't funny, Holly. Phoebe, are you kidding me right now? My father, your mother seems upset. Should we still come? I typed. Yes, come. The gate's open. I went inside and put water on for coffee. They arrived together, my mother's sedan followed by Phoebe's leased SUV. I watched them pull up the gravel drive from the front window, watched them get out and stand in the yard looking up at the house the way people do when they can't quite process what they're looking at. Garrett was with Phoebe. He stood slightly behind her with the expression of a man who had walked into something and was still working out what it was. I opened the front door before they reached it. My mother looked at me and then at the house and then back at me and said, "What is going on?" It wasn't the question. "Come in," I said. "I've got coffee." "Holly." Her voice was tight. "What are you doing here? Are you working for the new owners? Did you get hired to document?" "What is this?" "I'm making coffee," I said. "Come in out of the cold." She walked in slowly, the way you walk into a place you've wanted for a long time and are trying to pretend you don't want. Her eyes moved over everything. The original moldings, the wide plank floors, the staircase with its turned balusters. For a second, I saw what it cost her, seeing all of it intact. The contractor she'd brought in January had probably had this foyer as a blank canvas in his mind. Open it up. Take out the staircase wall. Add some shiplap. "This is mine," I said. She turned and looked at me. "I bought it 3 weeks ago," I said. "Private sale, cash transaction. Mrs. Alderton accepted my offer before yours was ever formally processed." My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. It went completely still. Not angry, not injured. Just still, like a computer screen that's frozen. "That's," Phoebe started. "That's not." She stopped. "I've been working with Mrs. Alderton for 2 years," I said. "Documenting the textile collection, we knew each other. When the time came, she wanted the house to go to someone who would take care of it." I paused. She specifically did not want it to go to a developer. My mother found her voice. "You had an inside track," she said. "You used your position to make an offer she was free to accept or reject," I said. "Which is how real estate works. You should know. You sabotaged us." Her voice was rising now, losing the tight control she usually kept it under. "You knew we were trying to buy this property and you went behind our backs. You called me to co-sign your loan 3 days after you laughed at my career at your dinner table," I said. Silence. I hadn't planned to say it quite like that. It came out level and quiet. which was maybe worse. That wasn't. My mother started. It was exactly what it was, I said. And I've been listening to versions of it my whole life. My work is a whole thing. My work is not worth explaining. My work is not worth explaining. My work is for blankets. I looked at Phoebe when I said the last one. She looked away. You've all made it very clear what you think of what I do. But here's what you didn't know about what I do. I know every serious collector, conservator, and historical society within 300 miles of this house. I've been published in 3 peer-reviewed journals. I was invited to speak at a conference in Scotland this fall. And I had enough money, in cash-accessible accounts, to buy this property outright without a loan, without a cosigner, without your help or your approval. My mother stared at me. Garrett, standing by the door, said nothing. He was staring at the ceiling molding. Your offer was rejected, I said. Not because of me, because it was contingent, over-leveraged, and came with a contractor who wanted to take out the back wall of the kitchen before he'd finished his site visit. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, a printout of the rejection letter from the bank, which Mrs. Cole, Alderton's attorney, had passed along as a courtesy. I held it out. Mrs. Alderton's attorney thought I might want to see this. I don't need it anymore. My mother didn't take it. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said. And I meant it, even if the timing made it seem otherwise. I'm doing this because I love this house and I'm the right person to take care of it, and because you spent a decade treating my work like it was something to be embarrassed about, and I'd like you to understand that it wasn't. I tucked the paper back into my pocket. Coffee's in the kitchen. I'd love to show you the collection if you're interested. The sampler alone is worth the trip. My mother walked out. My father, who had been standing very still near the door the whole time, met my eyes for a moment. He looked tired. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like he was seeing something he hadn't wanted to see about himself. He nodded, once, slowly. Then he followed my mother out. Phoebe started to leave and then stopped. How much? She asked. How much what? She asked. How much what? How much did you buy it for? I told her. She closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and walked out without another word. Garrett lingered at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I looked you up after dinner last month. Your work is remarkable. He glanced around the foyer. This place is lucky. Then he left. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the old farm table that had come with the house. The retaliation started within the week. My mother, as I'd expected, was not someone who took defeat quietly. There was an anonymous complaint filed with the State Historic Preservation Office. Someone claiming I hadn't disclosed a conflict of interest in my prior documentation work on the estate. The investigator who called me was apologetic before I'd finished saying hello. I had documented disclosures on file for every visit I'd made to the estate. The complaint was closed within 48 hours. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, who lives 20 minutes from my parents and has always functioned as my mother's most loyal lieutenant, called to tell me that I'd broken my mother's heart and that the family was struggling to understand how I could be so selfish. I asked her to name one specific thing my mother had done to support my career in the last 10 years. She said that wasn't the point. I said that it kind of was. She hung up. Phoebe was more sophisticated about it. She didn't call, she posted. It was a carousel on Instagram. The first slide was a photo of a beautiful old house, not the Alderton estate, a stock photo, with text overlay that read, "Some things should be preserved. Some people shouldn't." The next slides were variations on the theme of betrayal and loss and the question of what we owe each other as family. She tagged it with words like grief and boundaries and healing. Her 60,000 followers responded the way they always do, with hearts and candles and long comments about how she deserved better. I watched this happen from my phone while sitting on the floor of the Alderton Estate's upstairs bedroom, where I was doing a condition assessment of the wool coverlets. The irony of the word preserved in her caption was not lost on me. What Phoebe didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had documentation going back 4 years. Text messages, emails, 2 voicemails my mother had left that she'd probably forgotten about. in which she described my work to someone on the other end of the call in terms that were specific and unkind. I wasn't a litigious person. I wasn't planning to use any of it, but I also wasn't going to pretend it didn't exist. I emailed my mother, my father, and Phoebe. Subject line, "For your information." I told them that I had documentation of years of private communications in which my career and my character had been misrepresented to others. I told them that I had no interest in making any of it public, and I would not, as long as the current campaign of anonymous complaints and social media implications stopped. I told them that I had already spoken with an attorney about what constituted defamation in a professional context, and that I was prepared to be serious about this if I needed to be. I told them I didn't want to need to be. I told them that I wished things were different, and that I meant that sincerely, and that they were welcome to come see the house whenever they wanted to come see it for what it actually was. Then I went back to the coverlets. The response was silence. Long, absolute silence. The response was silence. Phoebe's carousel stayed up, but she didn't add to it, and the comments slowed and then stopped. My aunt stopped calling. The preservation office didn't hear from anyone again. Silence, in my family, means compliance. It's not forgiveness, and it's not resolution. But it's something. 3 months later, my father came to the house. I was in the back garden, which had been badly overgrown and was becoming, slowly, under the hands of a landscaper who specialized in historic restoration plantings, something like what the old photographs in Mrs. Bersant Alderton's albums suggested it might once have been. I heard a car on the gravel and looked up, and there he was, standing at the garden gate, in jeans and a fleece jacket instead of his usual retirement uniform of khakis and a zip-up. He looked older than I remembered him looking, which is something that happens in stages and then all at once. "I should have called," he said. "Probably," I said. He came through the gate and stood in the garden for a moment, looking around. Then he looked at me. "I owe you an apology." "Yes," I said, "you do." He sat down on the old stone bench near the back wall and was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know I'm not here because your mother asked me to come. She doesn't know I'm here." He paused. "She's still very angry." "I know." "She may always be angry," he said. I'm not defending it, I'm just telling you." "I know that too." He looked at his hands. "I let you down," he said, "not just at dinner. For a long time. I knew what was happening, and I told myself it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't my place, or you were strong enough to handle it yourself." He looked up. "That last one was almost true. You were strong enough. But that doesn't mean you should have had to be." I didn't say anything for a minute. The wind moved through the garden. Somewhere in the house, one of my assistants was opening and closing a door. "Thank you," I said finally. "It's a start." He nodded. We sat in the garden for a while. He asked about the restoration, and I told him, and he listened in the way he always had when no one else was around, genuinely, quietly, without judgment. He asked what the coverlets were. I told him. He asked what they were valuable. I said they were invaluable, which wasn't a dodge. It was the truest answer I could give. Before he left, he stood at the gate for a moment and looked back at the house. "It's beautiful, Holly," he said. "I didn't understand it before. What you were doing. I think I'm starting to." He didn't say goodbye. He just got in his car and drove away. I stood in the garden for a long time after. The Alderton estate is 9 months into a 2-year restoration plan now. The climate system is in. The silk damask is stable. The wool coverlets are back in the upstairs bedroom, properly supported and documented, where they've lived for 160 years. The sampler is still where it always was. I decided to leave it. Some things belong where they are. I have more contracts than I can comfortably handle. 3 new inquiries this month alone, including one from a foundation in Charleston that found my name through a colleague at the Smithsonian. The journalist at the magazine rescheduled 3 times and finally came out in February. The piece ran last month. It's good. My mother has not mentioned it. I don't expect her to. Garrett and Phoebe broke up in June. He texted me to say he was sorry for the whole situation and that he thought I had handled it with more grace than he would have. I told him I wasn't sure grace was the right word for what I'd done, but that I appreciated him saying so. Phoebe has been quiet. Not cruel, not kind. Just quiet. It's possible that's growth. It's possible it's just exhaustion. Either way, I'll take it. My father calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but most of them. We talk about the house and the garden and sometimes about nothing in particular. It's not the relationship I might have wanted if things had been different. But it's a real one, which is more than it used to be. I had been the quiet one for so long that my family had confused my silence with absence. They thought that because I didn't argue back, I wasn't paying attention. They thought that because I didn't announce my life, I didn't have one. I was paying attention to everything. I always have been. That's the job. You look closely, you listen carefully, you find what's underneath the surface that everyone else walked past. You'd be surprised what you find when you actually look. There's a version of the story where I stay quiet forever, where I keep driving the 90 minutes home, keep loading dishes, keep saying I'm fine when I'm not, keep letting the table define me. I almost lived that version. For a long time, I think I was living it. What changed wasn't a dramatic moment of decision. It wasn't anger, exactly. Or not only anger. It was something quieter than that. It was the recognition that I had been operating under a set of rules I never agreed to. Rules that said the loudest person in the room is the most successful. That if your work doesn't photograph well, it doesn't count. That love means you owe people access to your resources even after they've told you, in front of company, that your life isn't worth explaining. I didn't buy the Alderton estate to hurt my mother. I want to be honest about that, even now. I bought it because I was the right person for it, and because Mrs. Alderton deserved someone who would actually take care of what she'd spent her whole life protecting. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't something else underneath it. A need, finally, to be seen accurately. Not celebrated. Not vindicated in some dramatic public way. Just seen for what I actually was, after years of being seen as something smaller. What I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way, not read in a book, is that the people who underestimate you are almost always doing it because your life doesn't fit the shape they've decided success is supposed to take. My mother understood square footage. She understood commission checks and open house traffic and the particular status that comes from a certain zip code. She was genuinely good at those things. But because my work didn't live in that world, she couldn't locate it on any map she knew how to read. And rather than admit she didn't understand it, she decided it wasn't worth understanding. That's a choice. It looks like a judgment about you, but it's actually a choice about them. About what they're willing to be curious about, what they're willing to sit with, what they're willing to not immediately know the value of. I spent years trying to translate myself into a language my family could hear. I stopped. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. The work was always going to be what it was. The house was always going to be what it was. The only thing I could change was whether I kept apologizing for both. My father came to the garden 3 months after everything fell apart, and he said something I think about a lot. He said he told himself I was strong enough to handle it alone. And I was. But that's not the same as it being right. There's a version of care that hides behind someone else's competence, that says, you don't need me, so I don't have to show up. My father was living in that version for 30 years. Naming it, finally, was the beginning of something real between us. I think about the 12-year-old girl who stitched that sampler in 1863. She made something careful and precise and full of intention, and then she hung it on a wall, and then she lived her life, and then she died. And the sampler outlasted everything. It's still there, still hanging where it always was. Nobody knows her name. But the work remains, and it's extraordinary. That's what I want to remember when the noise gets loud. The work remains. Do it well, do it honestly, and trust that the people who are meant to see it will find their way to it. The ones who don't, that says everything about their vision and nothing about your value.